Hello and welcome to another basketball podcast. I'm your host, Justin Coben, and I'm joined today by my friend of the podcast and my Canadian friend, Stephane Rhynd. Today we're doing an exercise where we give our top 5 overrated and underrated players in the NBA. If you haven't yet, please subscribe to our podcast and hit the like button. It means a lot to us as we're trying to grow the channel. With all that being said, Stephane, why don't you give the fans a little introduction and then we can get going.
Yeah, definitely excited to be on today. As Justin said, we've known each other now for a few years, and we've just been playing basketball. And I think kind of Justin's already started it, but how it kind of came about is we would always just talk about NBA, talk about basketball, and I think we just enjoyed like fun little trivia statistics things here and there. I mean, we certainly love our sports gambling too.
Yeah,
And I
of
think that's
course.
kind of just what kicked this off, where we were like, I think to have a forum where we could talk basketball is the perfect thing for us, and to share our thoughts with other people as well. Yeah, as Justin said, I'm from Toronto, so big Raptors fan. There's a few things. I think there's a little bit of bias with the list today, but I tried to be as impartial as possible. But I've always got to shout out the Raptors a little bit. So yeah, just really looking forward to talking about what Justin said, the top 5 overrated and underrated players, and seeing what other people think about our lists.
Yeah, so one stipulation I would say, if we both have the same underrated player, then
Oh
they're
yeah,
not underrated, right?
that
Because
is,
then,
yeah. I
so we
mean,
got
I
to
was
take that in.
hoping, we didn't. So I guess just for the people watching, we didn't coordinate anything ahead of time. So there's a possibility that we'll have the same people on the same list. But I was trying to think as outside of the box as possible so that we wouldn't be in agreement about everything. But I think you'll be surprised by some of my takes.
You just picked a guy that plays like 1 minute per game, super super underrated.
Yeah, but the NBA released like a poll where they polled several players on certain things. I just copied the list of most overrated players voted by them.
No, it's funny. Like I was doing a little research prior, and I don't realize that certain podcasts put out like this type of material. And I saw a podcast that I listened to put out this like article on Bleacher Report about like this exact topic.
Yeah,
We just came up with it off the cuff.
I didn't look at anything online. I tried to
Me
be
neither.
as authentic as possible, not to get influenced by any opinions. But I did look at that list just from the players polls because I was just curious, like, what do people think, or what do active players think of their peers? Uh,
Yeah, that's a
but
good reference.
I don't think anything was overly surprising. Like, I think if you looked at the list, you'd be like, seems about right.
And I feel like with overrated players, sometimes it gets to a point where everyone thinks they're overrated, and then at that point, then they're kind of underrated because everyone in the world thinks they're overrated. So that would mean that they're properly or underrated. I feel
Yeah.
so. It has to be unique for me. Like I'm trying to be a little bit unique about some of these takes, so people don't get too offended. They're still good players. They're just slightly overrated.
I mean, I think a caveat too before I share anything too is because overrated doesn't necessarily mean like a bad basketball player. I think the way I was kind of thinking about it is like is somebody talked about too much, like they're a good player, but they're kind of like talked about as if they're one of the best players, then that would still to me be considered overrated. And then the opposite is true, where it's like, is somebody like really good, but they just never get talked about in conversations. That was kind of the frame of mind I was going into to the exercise with, because again, just overrated doesn't mean bad, and underrated doesn't mean like it's super good either. It doesn't mean like they're the best players either. It's really just to me like, are they talked about enough, or are they talked about too much?
And then
That's
there's like, are they overrated by the fans? Are they overrated by organizations? That's another level to it. Like Mikal Bridges, is he worth 5 first-round picks? Is that overrated from the fans' perspective? Is that too much of a package for him? Is he worth that amount? So that could be one way people see overrated, and then other people could look at the stats and be like, he's not very efficient, but
yeah,
he's taking tons and tons of shots. So that would make him by definition overrated. So there's different ways to look at it. We're gonna
yeah.
have fun with it.
Yeah.
I'm down to jump in if you are.
Yeah,
Do
yeah,
you
no,
want to give? You want to start with the overrated or the underrated side?
people really typically enjoy the overrated because I think that's what stirs the most conversation. So, why don't we start with underrated? Because I feel like we'll save the best for last.
Yeah. Keep the
But
people waiting.
but it's funny because I didn't even take into consideration the trade value. Like, I'm not gonna knock Mikal
I didn't
Bridges.
either, to be honest. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, because he got five first. Because I don't think he's worth five first round draft picks, but I don't think he's overrated or underrated by any means either.
Yeah, I
Uh,
considered that though, like with OG Anunoby, even too. Like,
yeah,
is he worth a max level contract? Is Mikal Bridges worth that five first round? Like, those are guys I considered, but I ended up going the more statistical route, as I'm sure you did as well.
yeah.
Do you want to give your first underrated one?
Yeah, why don't
Mo-
we jump in? I'm trying to think of like I want to start with like the least controversial and then hopefully end on like the one that maybe the most controversial. So I think the one that I would say is kind of the least controversial for me right now, just on my list, is I think yeah, we'll start with Dante DiVincenzo. Um, I just because and you'll see with my list later on too. Like I was trying to pick a good mix of like what I would describe are like higher profile players, but then also some like role players.
Mhm.
And then when we started this exercise, like we mentioned earlier, like I was trying to just kind of like think of everything holistically. Like, are they talked about enough? Have they improved? And Dante was a guy that just kind of fit kind of all the things that we were talking about. Like year over year over year, he's continued to improve. And then he shot a career best 40% from three this year, which I mean
Mhm.
is unbelievable. And then I think too, what really sparked me wanting to put him on the list is like watching the playoffs this year. Obviously, there were a lot of contributors to the Knicks' success, but I just feel like even when Brunson went down, when other guys were going down, Dante's level actually kept going up and up and up as his usage went up. So, and actually, one of the metrics that I was looking at too, there was a site that was using it puts together basically all the plus minus of all the offensive stats and puts it into one statistic. So basically, like how above the average they are. And then same thing for the defense. And over the course again of his career, he had a career best on the offensive side this year and defensive side. So for me personally, I think that's a sign of somebody who's a bit underrated because I think he's a bit of an afterthought after Brunson, Randall, OG, Mikal Bridges now. But I really do feel like um, he's a really undervalued component of the Knicks' success.
I agree. That's a good pull. I didn't think about him, but if you look at his 3-point numbers, like you said, in the last 3 years, it's gone up. The last 4 or 5 years, it's gone up super steadily. From he was a 28% free throw shooter on Milwaukee, and then he moved to Sacramento, shot 36.8%. Then moved to Golden State, shot 39.7, and then on extremely high volume, 3.5 makes a game, 8.7 attempts. He shot over 40% from three, which is
Yeah,
incredible. It's like you said, when he was forced into a bigger role, guys went down, their usage guys went down, Randall, etc. He really stepped up and gave
yeah.
them high efficiency on a lot of attempts from three, which is,
And
that
he'll
makes
always he'll
sense.
always hold a spot dear to my heart too because he was probably the singular player that I made the most money off during the playoffs. I swear to
You just
God, like
made money on
every
the
time at
Knicks.
halftime, he'd have like roughly like 10 points, and then to score over 20 would be like plus 400, plus 500, and I'm like, that's insane.
Mm-hmm.
The guy is pulling. If he's getting an open look, he's not going to turn it down. And more often than not, he's going to hit it. And I think too, an underrated part of his game, and I don't have any statistics to back this up. He's also really good at driving and dribbling into the paint. So it's like if he gets like if a defender is going to run him off the 3 point line, he's more than capable of also just like pulling a midi or, getting into the paint and either laying it in or kicking it out to the open guy.
I agree with you. You made a lot of money on him and Hart rebounds, I remember. Those were two of your faves, the
Hart too.
Knicks.
I actually thought about putting Hart on my list too, but I was like, I can't have too many Knicks on this list. So
I was looking at him too, honestly, on the overrated side because his offensive rating is like
yeah,
so bad.
yeah,
Like so unbelievably bad. He brings like nothing to the table offensively. He's a good assist guy, can crash the glass, get some offensive rebounds, but
yeah,
not like a volume scorer. Doesn't really bring a lot of offense to a team.
yeah,
Definitely defensively and like hustle stats wise though, for
yeah,
sure. And then for mine, my first underrated player, I got Franz Wagner as mine. So he took a step back 3-point wise this year, but his field goal percentage is still right around where it was the year prior. And I feel like Paolo gets a lot of love on the Magic. He's kind of like the go-to guy. Everyone loves the Paolo hype. Paolo shot like 33% from three. I can pull up his numbers as well. His net rating was significantly worse than Franz Wagner. Franz gets very overlooked. He's fourth in the NBA in players that played 25 minutes plus in defensive rating last season. So he is a defensive hound. He's very long, gets in front of guys, plays really well internationally, and can score really well around the rim too. So he's an efficient scorer. Very good player. I just feel like he's overlooked. People don't really put him in that star category. I feel like he should be.
Well, one caveat too for the viewers is I feel like you do really have a soft spot for the Magic. So I'm not surprised.
I didn't put Suggs though, and I did not put KCP, even though I considered them. I put someone you would not expect on the Magic, which makes it more underrated, right?
No, definitely. With Franz, I really like the player. I think I agree with everything you're saying. It makes complete sense. I think he's properly rated at this point because I still feel like when people talk about the Magic, of course it's Banchero's number one, but I still feel like Wagner gets a lot of hype, because he was also a high draft pick. I think he's, like you said, he had a very good season alongside Banchero. So I would say I think he has a lot of upside. I think he's going to be a great player. But yeah, just, I don't know, thinking about what you're saying, is he underrated? I might debate that with you, but I think, it really all depends on how you view the Magic. If I know you're very bullish on them, doing really well this year. So I think in that sense, maybe it's like the best is yet to come. And that's kind of why you think they're a little bit underrated. And I agree with that.
But I don't think people put him in that star echelon with other players. And I feel like he is on that level. Like, I collect cards, and his market is not very like booming as opposed to a lot of other players who I feel like are on the same level. Like Josh Giddey cards go for more than Franz Wagner cards, which don't make sense to me, rookie to rookie wise. So I don't know. It's maybe just like I'm metagaming it a little bit, and like I have a couple different like avenues of which I can kind of calculate which players are overrated and underrated.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
I get it. I think the only thing I would ask you, so you're saying you feel like he's a star. Would you say then Banchero is a superstar?
I think they're very close in how good they are. I think Banchero is slightly better. He has higher upside, but I think as of right now, they're like pretty level in terms of like who is better than who.
Because the only reason I'm asking is like I would describe them both as stars, but not yet superstar. I think it's just a consistency thing. Because like I remember even watching in the playoffs against the Cavs, and I don't have the stats right in front of me, but it did feel like Banchero actually elevated his game, and there were games where I think he even dropped 40 in one game. I feel like Franz struggled a little bit, so that's why it's like if he can do it consistently, then I would very much put him in like the superstar tier, and I think he'll get talked about a lot more. But
yeah,
a good first pick.
I think that playoff run, that playoff stretch, isn't a good indication of his talent. Just Paulo was taking it to the next level. I agree with you. Franz did not look good in the playoffs. It's his first playoff run really ever. So you got to give him a little slack. I think that we'll see a better, like more consistent game in the playoffs, like later on in his career. He's only 22, so.
I mean, they're a very young team, so I agree with you a lot. The best is yet to come.
You want to go with your number two?
So this one, I'm also I was surprised personally. I had written him down initially because I was telling Justin, like, when we were putting these lists together, I was just looking at the whole NBA roster and just like immediate, like not every player had to be underrated or overrated, but immediate knee-jerk reaction, underrated, overrated. So I put this guy as an underrated player, but then when I actually looked at the stats, I'm like, he's extremely, extremely underrated. And it's Jared Allen. And it's funny because like I also think to myself, I'm like, centers, I mean, let's face it, the NBA is not really focused around centers anymore besides maybe Jokic. So I'm like, I know that takes away a little bit of like their value, but I was looking at his statistics and I was like, I was floored. I was blown away. So he is in the 90th percentile, again, for the adjusted statistic that I was telling you about that takes all the plus minus offensive and defensive categories. He was in the 90th percentile for both offense and defense. and I was very surprised about the offense. I mean, somebody can fact check me, but like I was looking at it, I double checked it, I couldn't believe it. But he's a very efficient shooter, great rebounder. I mean, I think he does things really well. And then I think his defense speaks for itself. I mean, people already talk about him as a good defender, but like again, the stats back it up. He's 23rd in player efficiency rating, which was higher than, off the top of my head, I know it was higher than Kevin Durant. And then he's also third in the total NBA in estimated wins added. So I'm just like, for me personally, it was just the eye test. I feel like he just impacts winning. But then when you actually look at the statistics, he's like, I mean, when you're third in estimated wins and it's like Jokic and I think it was Giannis were 1 and 2, I think that just, speaks again to the kind of impact he is having on winning, especially because people are looking at Donovan Mitchell, they look at Darius Garland, but I'm like, I don't know. For me, it's like he's right there with Mitchell as a pillar of success for the Cavaliers. So he's my number 2 underrated player.
Yeah, it's a little easier for him defensively when you have like him and Evan Mobley both kind of like roam in the paint. So that's a point. And then the bigs that are his style, right? Like it's weird because he can't really create his own shot. So obviously he's going to shoot very high efficiency from the field. He's going to
Yep.
catch a lot of lobs. He's going to get kind of given the ball in positions to
Yep.
score, not going to shoot from the outside. So I would love to dig into those numbers a little more. I don't disagree with you though. Like if you're looking at the Cavs roster and you're like, what team would trade for Jared Allen? What team needs that style of big? I've done this exercise a million times, and I feel like no one really needs that style of big, which makes him underrated because he's such a good NBA player and would be a help in most teams. Just so many teams have like a lack of spacing that they like, only a few teams fit really his style of play. Yet his style of play is like he's so good at what he does. Everything he does really well. Block shots at a really high rate. Is decent free throw shooter for his size at 74%, which is huge for a big like him. And he shoots extremely efficiently. There's many bigs that catch the ball like him and don't finish around the rim as well. So I'm with you there.
Yeah, and I mean the only other thing too I would add is I feel like like just again like based on the eye test, like I feel like you could really feel his presence was missing in the second round. Now they're not going to beat the Celtics regardless, but for me, like you lose Jared Allen, and I feel like the Cavs are not as good defensively. I just feel like they don't have that anchor in the middle. But if you lose, let's say Mobley, and I'm still high on Mobley, but if Mobley was the one that was injured and Jared Allen was still in there, I think the Cavs would have been more competitive just because I think he's a better rim runner. I think, I get what you're saying, but I still think that everything that he does when you're watching him is very efficient. He's not going to take a shot and force it, like go 1-on-1 and back somebody down. But he's also good at like, he's going to roll if he sees an opening. He's always going to find the right spot. And I think that's equally as important as just spacing on the floor, knowing where to be. And again, like I said, this was purely off the eye test, and then digging deeper, I was like, the stats also back it up that I think he has an impact on winning. So
Yeah,
yeah.
I wouldn't say that his style is dated. I don't think I said it exactly like that. I think his style is just very team specific. Let's say that. He fits in very few situations. You need to have probably 3 or 4 shooters around him at all times. So like guys like him, Gobert, these big lumbering centers, rim protecting centers, they're super valuable. They're just, you need to have a very specific amount of guys or like type of guys around him. And then the Cavs are a weird situation because they have 2 of that style of big. So we have to see which direction they go. I really thought after the Celtics they were going to make some moves, but they brought in Kenny Atkinson and they're just going to try to run it back with new coaching and see how it all meshes. So that it'll be interesting to see this year if those 2 can mesh. I love Mobley and I love Allen. I just don't know if they're perfect next to each other.
No, and I agree. And you didn't say dated. I guess more I was thinking like he can't shoot anything outside the paint. Like he doesn't have a jump shot.
Yeah.
But if the metrics are what they are, which is what I just said, earlier, and he somehow, because I think anyone can develop a jump shot if they just put the time in. If he were to develop a jump shot, even if it was not a 3-pointer, just like a mid-range jump shot, I could see him very well being like a top 3 center in the league, top 5 for sure. if he isn't already. But like, I think if he added that to his game, then the sky's the limit for him.
Yeah, Sneaky only 25 years old. You don't realize that.
Yep.
And I was telling Marco on the last pod that when I worked for the Nets, I remember pregame, I was like sitting courtside one game and Jared Allen was just chucking threes like in his like first to second year.
Yep.
And he was like a pretty good shooter in warmups. He doesn't attempt them much in games, like 0.1 attempt per game, but like it's not impossible. Like guys like Brooke Lopez did develop a 3-pointer late. Like these are things that happen. Maybe he takes a step in. Maybe it's not a three, but
And I
you know,
think you talked with Marco too about Bam. He's starting to shoot more threes for Team
yeah,
USA. So I'm like, I think they're being encouraged more and more to shoot. I don't think Allen will ever. I don't know, just like the way maybe his frame's built. Like I don't know, it seems a little clunky. But like if he starts, even Jonas Valanciunas is shooting 3-pointers at a decent clip. So I'm like, I think there's hope, and if he could add that to his game, then again, I think it's only going to make him even more underrated than he already is.
yeah. I agree with you. Okay, so I'm going to jump to my next complete
Yes.
opposite player, like the most opposite player you could ever think of, Tyus Jones.
Uh-huh.
And Tyus Jones just signed with the Suns for $3 million on a 1 year deal. How do you get Tyus Jones for $3 million on a 1 year deal? It's insane. That screams underrated to me just right off the jump. He shot 41.4% from three last year. He broke the record for assist to turnover ratio in a single season last season.
Yep.
The Wizards were awful. He was like one of the worst defensive rating in histories last year as well.
Yeah.
One
Yeah.
of the worst in the NBA, rather. But I like what he brings on offense a lot. I think part of the reason, I know coupled with injuries, the Grizzlies fell apart, but I think he was a big part of the reason that the Grizzlies fell apart. They lost him as that backup point guard. Um, he just brings a lot to a second unit. He can start in a lot of situations, does not turn the ball over, is extremely good passer. He'll make the Suns a lot better next season. And I just feel like people kind of forgot about him. Like he was kind of doing what Jalen Brunson in Dallas was doing. I'm not saying he's that level of scorer. He's not even close, but like small guard, really good passer, and can bring a lot to a franchise. And I feel like he's, very underrated.
No, I mean I didn't have him on my list, but I couldn't agree with you more. I don't know how he got signed for $3 million. My thought process when I saw that was, I feel like he's been on bad teams perennially. Like he was on Memphis, and I think there was some hype around him behind Ja. But just since then, I feel like when you're on a bad team, sometimes I feel like oh he's just doing these things on a bad team. Empty minutes, not winning minutes. And maybe that's what impacted his options in free agency. And he probably would have gotten a longer term deal with more money. But I think probably what's alluring to this is that he gets a show me deal, right? He gets to go to Phoenix. He might even start, I don't know, alongside Booker if
I know.
you prefer to have Book at the two. And he could very well have a big season and then, secure a 15 million per year deal in free agency next year. So I couldn't agree more. I think he's extremely underrated. I don't know how he signed for 3 million. That's my only thought process is that he was seeking out a perfect situation to maximize his value. But yeah, I didn't even know about he broke the record for what did you say the assist to turnover ratio?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay,
He like turned never. He didn't. He turned the ball over one turnover per game and had 7.3 assists per game. It's pretty
incredible,
insane.
and especially on the team
Yeah.
that was on. So I can only see that getting better with I mean, you're putting Book around him, Kevin Durant, Bradley Beal, guys that can shoot. I mean,
Hmm.
now again, I will caveat that he's probably not going to be the point person or the facilitator of the offense, but I think he'll still have opportunities to really showcase his playmaking abilities. So, um,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I really love the take. So I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. New coaching and Budenholzer. The Suns are intriguing to me. I'm keeping my eyes on them. They brought Grayson Allen back. They got the 3 stars and Beal,
Yeah,
Booker, KD, Nurkic. I don't know which route they go if they do go ties because they brought in Monte Morris too.
yeah,
So like, I mean he won't start, but I don't know if Tyus is the starter there. Grayson Allen off the bench. I don't know how they run it, but it'll be interesting to watch. I think they're a team that I'm so like 50-50 on, but that kind of moves them up for me in terms of like the regular season standings.
yeah. I mean, I'm fairly not to get off topic, but I'm fairly bullish about the Suns too because I feel like Coach Bud is a good coach. Won that championship with the Bucks. I think it's just the NBA is a bit volatile. You have one down season and you're gone. or like, Coach Griffin for the Bucks this year doesn't even make it a full season. So I
Yeah,
just think a
exactly.
coach that, has won a championship, I think he'll have the respect of the players. He's an offensive coach, right? Because he coached the Atlanta Hawks to, I think, historic offensive numbers before going to the Bucks. So I think KD, his biggest complaint with Vogel is that he was just in the corner all the time. I think this year we'll see a much better Suns team. So, and that has also to do with, like you said, Tyus Jones stepping in. So,
Yeah, and then one point to your Adrian Griffin comment. I did a trivia with Marco. I don't know if you saw it, but Adrian Griffin before or after he's fired is like top 3 all time in win percentage as a head coach. Isn't that insane? Because he was doing so well, and then they just fired him because they weren't happy.
I mean, I don't know. Talk about a knee jerk reaction. I think they lost like 2 games by like 30 points, which of course not
Yeah,
good. But they like when he got let go, it was like 40-20 or 30-10. Like I don't know, it was something crazy. But yeah, I agree with you. And that's a whole
it's just
other
a funny
topic.
stat.
Yeah, that's a great stat.
Yeah,
Do you want me to
Joe
jump in?
Mazzulla is number 1
Joe Missoula. Okay, well, I
all
believe.
time.
I
Yeah,
believe.
go for it. Go for
I
your
believe.
number 3.
Um, hmm. For number 3, I think I'm gonna go with. I think I'll go with IQ. Emmanuel quickly. I know we've talked about him quite a bit, and obviously,
Mm-hmm.
as I mentioned before, I'm not trying to be too biased to the Raptors, but he's somebody that we've both talked about off the air as a very strong candidate for Most Improved Player of the Year. I know you've also talked about with Marco kind of comparing kind of what happened with Max this year, and I think it's a great comparison. And one interesting thing too, when I was looking, Maxi is in the 95th or 96th percentile for offense, but he was in like the 5th percentile for defense. So then immediately I was like, okay, let me look at what IQ was, and he was in the 56% for defense, which is by no means good, but I think he's only 23 years old. That's already a good base. And his offensive percentile was 89%. So it's like he's already almost like in the top tier for offense, and his defense is already, respectable enough. Like, I mean, is 50% great? No, but I'm just very excited. I think he's not talked about enough because he was kind of overlooked again on the Knicks for his potential, because I feel like defense is a lot of effort. Like you ask somebody to add, 3 or 4 moves to their offensive bag, that's just not doable. But getting better on defense, obviously size is a big thing, but I just think if you put effort, you're aware on defense, you know your assignments, that you can be a plus defender as well. So not only that, but again, like his offensive upside for me makes him very underrated. And what was really interesting too is that when he got traded to the Raptors, he had 1 month where he was averaging 23 points a game. And that was like his career average was like 13 points. And then he also had a month as well where he was averaging 9.3 assists. And I think, again, his average was like only 3 assists, with the Knicks. So I just think he's going to have huge usage upside. Like he's going to get a huge amount of usage. Obviously, Scotty Barnes is going to be the go-to guy. But quickly is a great scorer, a great facilitator. And like I said, his defense is not as bad as I would have thought it was. And I think he can improve a lot more. So for me, those are all the reasons why I think, he's a very underrated player. And I expect big things from him this year.
I couldn't agree with you more. We've talked about it a lot, and we both put our money where our mouth is. Got a little money on Emmanuel quickly for most improved player this season. So, I'm not going to have much to debate you on here. But I did want to make one note. I just was looking up some stats while you were talking,
Yes.
and if he had played the full season on the Raptors, right?
Yep.
Emmanuel quickly, while he was on the Raptors, averaged 6.8 assists and 1.8 turnovers per game. He would be third in the NBA in assist to turnover ratio if that was a full season long of statistics right there. We saw when he moved from the Knicks to Toronto, his 3-point percentage stayed the same, 39.5%, which is immaculate. The league average, I always say, is around 36.5, 36.6%. So way above that. His volume went way up. He just started taking less twos, switched to
Yeah,
shooting
yeah.
threes, which is kind of the way the game is evolving. I really like him, big stat stuffer, kind of do everything at this point, and I'm just waiting for that next breakout, and I think it's coming. I really do.
Yeah. I think he's just, he's a perfect complement for that team because when Scotty was out when he was injured, he was able to facilitate the offense. Like you saw, he's getting tons of assists, making sure everyone's touching the ball. But then when Scotty's there and is handling the ball, he's able to knock down. I think his percentage was like 35% or something like that. And when I was watching him play too, a lot of those were tough looks, like contested looks. Because sometimes last year they were riddled with injuries. Sometimes they were rolling out a lineup. It might have been like him, Agbaji, Olynyk, Bruce Brown, like guys that they're not going to scare the defense. Like he would be like getting double teamed, things like that, and he'd still find ways to score. So I just think with a healthy Raptors team, and again, I am a bit biased, but I think their over-under win total is 30.5. That is a complete slap in the face. I think they will easily clear 40 wins and push for the
40.
So I think, and he'll be a big
You
part
heard it
of
here
that.
first.
Yeah. I mean, I personally, if you want a really hot take, I think they will make the playoffs. I think not just the play-in, they will make the playoffs this year. They'll be either a 7 or 8 seed.
All right. I don't dislike it. They've decently talented roster. Their top seven's solid. With their starters, Bruce Brown and then Grady Dick. I don't know if Grady Dick's starting. It would be Quickly, Barrett, Barnes, Pirtle. Who's the fifth starter I'm missing? Is it Brown?
Olynyk, Brown,
Oh, Olynyk. Yeah. That's
Grady
what I'm
Dick,
missing.
maybe, yeah. But I think Pirtle's another guy too that was potentially on my underrated list because he's also another center that's overlooked. And again, he's not going to do anything flashy on offense, but he's a very efficient player and his defensive rating was quite high. And again, health is the biggest thing for them. If they have a healthy team, guys like Pirtle, guys like Quickly, Barrett, all of them are going to make a huge impact for this team. So I'm excited to see what they do. But yeah, I think for all those reasons, I know you're not disagreeing. IQ for me is an underrated player at the moment.
Yeah, just one comment on Pirtle. He's like the worst free throw shooter in the NBA. It's so fun. I've had him in fantasy for like so many years. He's so annoying, dude. It's like 40%.
It is true. That is a knock on him, and I wish he was a better free throw shooter because oftentimes late game he will get pulled for that reason. But in
Yeah.
terms of just another anchor, I think he's a very respectable center.
Okay, so mine kind of I'll just stick with the centers here. Well, not with Quickly, but with
Yep.
Pirtle there. And my third most underrated player, not in order, but I got Al Horford. And he's 37 years old, or he was 37 years old last year and was third in the NBA in net rating. He was 11th in the NBA in assist to turnover ratio for players who played at least 25 minutes. He shot 51.1% from the field, 41.9% from three, and 86.7% from the line in his age 37 season. And he's playing a lot of minutes, heavy minutes. Is like the defensive anchor for the Celtics. Porzingis isn't super reliable health-wise. Everyone thinks, oh, Derek White, Drew Holiday, all these guys are underrated. Those are the guys that people would say are underrated for the Celtics. But I really think the most underrated player in the Celtics is.
I mean, you nailed, like I don't have any of the statistics in front of me, but I think you nailed it on the head. I mean, I feel like Al, well, first of all, did an admirable job because KP was basically completely MIA at all the playoffs, and Al, I thought did a great job. Like we've talked about before, he's a great distributor. I think he always makes the right decision with the ball. He's never going to take a bad shot, but obviously more often than not, it's going to be an open quarter three. And he hit them, with. I think he struggled a little bit in the playoffs, but he was hitting them pretty regularly. So I think I love it. He's kind of Mr. Dependable for them, and I think that's a lot of players are underrated, right? Because you see Tatum and you see Brown, but I think Al Horford's contributions are very important, especially this year. Like I said, with KP not being in the lineup, so couldn't agree more with you. I think he's very underrated.
That's how I feel, man. But yeah, he's a fun guy to watch as a Celtics fan. He has a weird 3-point form, but they go in a lot, and just having a big that's dependable from the free throw line, can kind of play the 4 and the 5, can be the staple to hold the defense down, and really not talked about in that light. I feel like from like NBA fandom. So I just thought from watching a lot of games.
Well,
Good
personally, I didn't
player.
put any Celtics on my underrated list just because I feel like they get talked about way too much. People like Derek White's underrated, Drew Holiday's underrated, but like
Yeah,
every time you turn on ESPN, Dorsberg is, or JJ Redick is like, oh my God, Drew Holiday. Oh my God, Derek White. Like they're the unsung heroes. And then of course I know Al Horford wasn't mentioned in the same breath, but it's like I think Al Horford's always been dependable his whole career, so I feel like he's properly rated. But I agree that he's not talked about nearly enough in terms of his contributions to the team. But yeah, I just didn't include any Celtics because I'm like, they've been talked about plenty enough. If anything, probably
that's
too much.
valid. That's valid. Yeah, that's fair. I just couldn't leave him off. I was looking at the numbers and everything just was, it screamed underrated. Like third in net rating. Like
I mean, yeah.
he's just very good at everything. There's nothing he does bad.
Can I say though, maybe a caveat to the net rating though is if you're on a good team, naturally your
That's
net
true.
rating would be a little bit higher. You put him on the Wizards, I think his net rating would be in the negatives. But I do agree that third overall is still very good.
Yes, that
And I
is a
would
true
say
point.
too, I feel like on the same token too, where everyone's talking about the Celtics, like I'm sure you've seen it. Tatum's been getting quite a bit of flack. People joking about him getting carried to the finals, and now he's not even playing on Team USA, and they're like he's going to get carried to a gold medal. So I think it's funny. It goes both ways.
Good for him. He deserves both. As a Celtics fan, he gets the ring. If they want to say he carried it, he was carried there. I'm happy for him. He still got a ring. If they want to say he's carried to a gold medal, I'm happy for him. He still got a gold medal as a Celtics fan. So I
And
don't care.
his peers voted him. I think he was one of the MVPs. Like people had voted him as the MVP. So clearly people think he's a great player. I think that's just more fans overreacting, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, anyways, that's why I didn't include any Celtics. I just feel like they're talked about a lot. But I know you're from Boston, you love them, so I'm sure you had to plug at least one of them.
Yeah, of course. After winning the chip, you gotta. All right, who's your fourth here?
Man, I'm laughing now too because I somewhat realized it, but now I'm like, I love the centers, man. So my
Mm.
fourth guy was, and I will say too, it's in no particular order. It's not. I think one is the most underrated. Again, it was just more like I just wanted to save what I feel like is the best for last. But my fourth underrated player is Alperen Sengun. Um, I do think he's talked about. I do think people realize he's a good player, but again, it's a classic case if I had put him in my underrated list, and then I looked into the stats even more, and I'm like, thoroughly impressed. He was again. Jared Allen was 3 in estimated wins added. He was fourth. And again, when do centers really add that much value? But here he is. He's the fourth in the entire NBA for that statistic. He's 19th in player efficiency rating, which again is like higher than some players. Notably, again, Kevin Durant was one of the guys. I think he was like, KD was like 28 or 29. He's got, his defensive statistics are not the most amazing. I mean, he's not like what I would describe as like an anchor. Somebody's going to anchor your defense and, shut people down. But I just think his offensive game, the things that he adds on the offensive end, how he like opens up spacing and everything for everyone else because he can also shoot from outside. I just don't think he's talked about enough in terms of I think the impact he's making, and me putting him on the list goes hand in hand with my thought, which is that the Rockets are going to push for a play-in and even maybe a playoff spot this year. I think with a healthy team, they're going to be very competitive this year.
That's fair. I will say the estimated wins added, it's like all centers at the top, which is these centers, they get all the love. They win defensive player of the years because of the block stat. They shoot extremely efficiently from the field because all they're doing is shooting from 2 feet away. It's a little unfair to guards. I don't disagree. I really like Alperen Sengun as a player. But I just have a little gripe with the whole, like,
No. And
the centers of it all.
it's a completely fair point. I guess why I kind of like doing this underrated list is I feel like people just are like I feel like, and I'm by no means an NBA GM, but I feel like GMs nowadays are like, we can find a center in the second round and just like plug them in and like we'll be fine. Like centers don't matter; they don't impact.
Yeah.
I know that's a bit of an extreme take, but like I just feel like the value on centers. People are like, oh well, if you can't shoot the three, then immediately you're less valuable. And then it's like, it's, different from the days of like the, early 2000s, even earlier, right? Where you guys had like Shaq and you just throw him, the ball in the post 20 times. That just doesn't happen anymore either. So I guess I'm just giving the center some love because I'm like, these guys are finding ways to impact the game without touching the ball nearly as often as the guards. Like, and I think, it's just, for me, they're an underrated um, position, underrated, they have underrated value in terms of impacting winning. So I will say, yeah, good caveat on that statistic, but nonetheless, it was, there were a few centers at the top, Jokic, and who was number two?
I can pull it back up. I just had
Oh,
it.
but
It was, I think, Embiid. Yeah, Embiid.
because then I think, and then after that, I think it really kind of becomes a mix of different positions, if I can remember off the top of my head. But either way, I just think that the fact that Sengun and Jared Allen are being mentioned in the same breath as Jokic and Embiid, like in terms of, it's one statistic, but you're talking about wins added to, like, that's impacting winning. If they're in the same breath as those guys, and they've obviously been doing something right. So yeah, I'm excited to see. Sengun, I believe, is only 23 as well, so I think he's got a very bright future ahead of him as well, and just can't wait to see, what comes of the Rockets this year.
Yeah, he's only 22, just turned 22, not even
22.
23, which is crazy. But I'll give you this. I'll give you this. So he can create his own shot more so than like a Jared Allen, and he's a better passer more so than like a Jared Allen. So you can make the case for that, and then he loses a step in terms of like his defensive ability to Jared Allen. So just different style of big. I like the way he plays a lot. I would probably say like properly valued because some people are so high on him and some people are like out on him. Like some people don't think him and Jalen Green can exist. Some people coexist rather.
Yeah.
Some people think that he's not the perfect fit on the Rockets. They need a more like Jared Allen style big, or you play Jabari Smith at the 5, things like that. So I can see both sides of the argument there.
I was just looking at it now too. The estimated wins added, the top 10 are all centers. So maybe that one carries less weight, but really for me, again, it was the player efficiency rating because I feel like, that's a statistic that, NBA execs, people who are involved in the NBA, value quite a bit because it's not just scoring. It's not just, doing one thing. It's how efficiently are you doing things. And I think that's what for me really carried the most weight for both Jared Allen and Sengun because, like, for example, Sengun is 19 in player efficiency rating. 20 is Jimmy Butler, then followed by Kyrie Irving, Devin Booker, Jared Allen, Daniel Gafford, Lauri Markkanen, and then Kevin Durant. And I'm just like, if you were to tell me that Jared Allen and Alperen Sengun are, mention the same breath as those guys, if not even better than those guys in that statistic, I would say probably, like, without knowing the statistics, would be like, no, probably not. They're way lower than those guys. And yet there they are. So obviously they're doing something well. And sometimes I think those are maybe the things that they're doing is not the flashy stuff that you'll see on House of Highlights, but instead it's just the stuff that I feel like people might not notice, but really adds value to a team winning. So that's why, anyways, I was showing those two guys some love because I feel like it was very surprising to me to see them, as high as they were.
It's a good point about the non-flashy style of play and like those guys being just as good as the guys who are doing like 360 dunks in games. Like it doesn't matter at all for like a player's actual value, but people love to see the highlight reel stuff. And then another point on my like advanced stats, I feel like baseball has gotten so good at the measurables. In basketball, we're not like there yet. We don't know what the trusted advanced stats are to go by with any of these things. Everything's so unknown and new. Like I feel like these things are just starting to get tracked within the last like 50 years. Even more and more recent than that, obviously, too. So, I don't know. I've hoped that the sport is going to be like more uniformly tracked in the future, and I think we're getting there. I can jump into my next.
Yes, let's do it.
Yeah, sorry. I will go with Trey Murphy III as my 4th most underrated player here, and he's sneaky 6'8". People don't realize that he's like very tall. He plays the 2, the 3, and the 4. He's played at least 20% at each of those positions last year. So 20% of his time on the floor. So he's kind of like, you can move him around, kind of a Army knife. People think of him as just like a 3-point shooter, but he was fourth in the NBA, tied with Franz actually in defensive rating last year. Has shot 40% from three, not this season, but the past season. He attempted more threes per game last year and shot, I believe it was 38% from three last year, 38 flat on 7.8 attempts per game. The year before, he was seventh in the most improved player polling, so he's definitely has gotten some love. But I feel like he's better than a Brandon Ingram, more of a clean fit on many offenses, and I feel like he's slept on as an actual like foundational piece for franchises on both sides of the ball.
It's funny because it's kind of similar to your first one where it's like I don't hate it by any means. But I always kind of felt like he's already being kind of talked about. Like I felt like he was properly rated, but I think also maybe just doing this exercise, kind of realizing that perhaps we watched the NBA, we talk about the most minute players when we're like thinking about like, sports betting or whatever it might be. So like maybe the general fan doesn't even know about Trey Murphy, and it's like
Yeah,
I'm
exactly.
thinking about it because like we've talked about him, but I really do feel like he's a huge piece, and I think that's probably why the Pelicans are comfortable moving on from Brandon Ingram. Like, because I know they got DeJounte Murray, but if they didn't feel like he was able to step in, I feel like fill that scoring goal and do the things that Brandon Ingram does, then I think they would keep him. But and they might ultimately keep him, but I just think they're trying to move him for a reason, and I feel like that's because, like you said, Murphy is. I think he's the guy, and I think he. To your point, I see what you're saying about being underrated because I think he should be talked about in the same breath as like I don't know, a guy like Desmond Bain comes to mind, guys that have made a lot of money and they're obviously solid players, but I think he can do the things that a lot of these guys can do that are probably top 50 players. So I agree with you. I feel like he should be talked about a lot more than he is.
That's how I feel. I feel like the Pelicans are so interesting because now they have no center there with JV's gone, Valanciunas. And they brought in Murray and Trey Murphy's like, where does he fit? Brandon Ingram kind of is like slows the ball down a lot. Is Trey Murphy going to start? Is Trey Murphy going to come off the bench? Are they going to have a center in the lineup? Is Zion going to play the five? Like, how are they going to run? Are they going to try to run fast and run a gun? So the Pelicans are a super interesting one to follow for the year. I think they're not done yet, I would say. We'll see.
Yeah. No, I mean, I will say I want to be bullish on the Pelicans. But I think when you make a big trade like that for DeJounte Murray, I feel like we've seen this like where teams acquire a superstar like Dame last year, and there's a lot of growing pains. I think inevitably the Pelicans will have some growing pains this year, but I think we talked about this a little bit. I think the Mavs will win the division, but the Pelicans could be a sneaky like dark horse to make a run all the way to the final potentially. I mean, they've got enough talent to do it. So, um,
Yeah, just two guards that struggled defensively, and McCollum and Murray. At least the last few years, Murray used to be on the Spurs. People were talking about him as like one of the better future
yeah,
defenders in the league, and he was awful on the Hawks defensively. So hopefully he can get to another level on that front. And they don't have a rim protector to back up these guards who can get blown by. So weird. I mean, Zion's good at shot blocking, but he's 6'6" at the end of the day. So, um, and it's going to be an interesting one on the Pelicans. I think I'm 50-50 right now, and if I think that they're going to be super good
I
this
mean,
year.
I think they just got too many people too. Even with getting rid of Dyson Daniels, they got a logjam, right? You got Herb Jones, Zion, Trey
I
Murphy. Like
know.
you got too many wings. I think I would love to see Trey Murphy get more minutes because I agree with you. I think watching him in the play-in game against the Kings, I think it was like he was making some really great plays. So I'm excited to see if he can get more minutes, what he could really do, not being
Yeah.
stuck behind some of these other players.
You want to go to your fifth?
I will go to
Last
my fifth.
underrated?
I don't know. For me, it felt like this one was I feel like would be a bit controversial, but um, I don't know, man. I really do feel like maybe people will be like, that's obvious, but for me, it was Jalen Brunson. And I think a lot of that for me just ties into he didn't get invited to Team USA. And
Hmm.
I'm sure some people might argue that Tyrese Halliburton's a better player. I'm not going to argue about Steph Curry being there, but I just feel like, he could have been shown a little bit more love. And I think, he's very much not regarded in the same breath as like, a Tatum or, some of the other guys that lead their teams in scoring. But like, again, Julius Randle goes down in the playoffs, you know, and they know that Jalen Brunson's how they're going to beat you. And he would still drop 40 points. He'd still drop 50 points. Like for me, immediately, not even looking at the statistics, I'm like, he should be regarded so much higher than he is just for the simple fact that he is single handedly sometimes taking games over. And he's what, 6'2", 6'3". He's definitely an undersized guard. So like for me, for him to be able to do that, go in the paint, he's hitting like little middies over top of a center that's closing out on him. I just think, I think he's underrated, and he's eighth in player efficiency rating. So it's not like he's just taking 50 shots a game and scoring 40 points. No, he's doing everything very efficiently. And on top of that, the offensive, rating that I was talking about that accumulates all the plus minus, he was sixth in the entire league for that as well. Now, I could focus on the defensive side, but I just think it's really his offensive component that makes him so valuable. I mean, he's not the best defender. Let's call it what
He's
it is.
small.
But
Yeah,
I mean, when you're scoring as much as he is, I think it covers up for a lot of his defensive deficiencies. So yeah, Jalen Brunson,
definitely.
underrated.
It's weird because it's when you know a lot of Knicks fans, you feel like they talk a lot and they hype up Brunson a lot. So
Yeah,
I can see both sides of it. So I think he's probably properly rated because some people think he's like this superstar world beater, and then on the other side of the page, I remember the first podcast Marco and I did. I said the Knicks don't really have a superstar, and like
yeah,
that's like, and some people like even myself sleep on him a little bit because when you dig into his numbers, he's over 40% from three, over 51.6. He shoots 51.6% on twos, which is super high efficiency. And he's not a guy that's big that's just like dunking the ball. He's crafting his way to the basket,
yeah,
floaters, mid range. He's super efficient at all levels. Really good passer to high assist to turnover ratio. Super efficient offensive player, no doubt.
Well, I think just the fact that you and Marco said there's no superstars on the Knicks, I think that's why I'm saying he's underrated, because for
That's
me,
what I mean. Yeah.
he's a bona fide superstar. Like it's not even a question anymore. Like, because again, we always talk about like we'll do it consistently. I mean, he's been since he's joined the Knicks, he's basically just been getting better and better and better and better, and he keeps doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I feel like a good benchmark for me is like, okay, like you're playing really well in the regular season, but then you kind of ghost in the playoffs. Then I'd be like, okay, like that's a big red flag. But he again, like no Julius Randle, and again they still have OG, DiVincenzo, Hartenstein. Like they had good players, but like the fact that they know that he's going to be their primary, you know, offensive juggernaut, and he's still dropping 40 points. Like his lines were set at like 34 and a half points a game. It's like that's a superstar.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're going to clear that line consistently, you're a superstar, in my opinion.
Yeah. He's just an interesting one because the Knicks literally had to like tailor their roster around the way that he plays. Like they just brought in so many defensive stoppers. OG now Bridges. They have Mitchell Robinson. They have Josh Hart. They like he's such a liability defensively. As like I mean he's better than like Trae Young is, but when you really have to tailor it, like he's super offense specific. But the Knicks have built it around him, and they've done a really good job in doing so. So they are a scary team. He can be an offensive superstar. I will agree with you there. So he's definitely an offensive superstar. It's just the debate if he's like a all around superstar,
Yeah.
I guess, in
No, I
my
mean, the
opinion.
last thing I'll say before you go to your last one is just like a guy like Fred Van Vliet is actually a plus
Mm-hmm.
defender at his size. So again, for me, it's like it's never too late for him to become a better defender. I just think like, and we've talked about this, we've argued about this, like to find a 3-and-D guy is much easier than it is to find a guy that can give you 25, 30 points a game. And I know I'm stating the obvious, but it's just like for me, defense is a skill that you can work on, you can acquire. Offense is much harder to get. So I just think like for me, his defense could always get better. And like I think he's what, 26, 27, still very young. So I think
Yeah, 27.
the best is coming for him as well. Anyways, I like Jalen Brunson. He's underrated.
Yeah, I'm with you there. Okay, my last one. I don't know if you're going to know much about him. He's kind of under the radar. He hasn't played much in his career yet. He's had 2 injury-riddled seasons, but when he's on the floor, he's one of the most impactful players in the league. Tari Eason.
For
He
the
led the NBA. Hmm?
for the Rockets, right?
Yes, yes, yes. So he
Yep.
led the NBA in defensive rating last year. He was by far and away the best defender in the NBA in terms of the metrics, the defensive rating metric. Um, he only played about 20 minutes per game, so I really had to like kind of fine tune the number. I think put it players who play over 20 minutes instead of 25, which I did for all my other statistics to get him in the mix. He shot 36% from three, not super. He's getting better. The first year's in the 33s. He's getting better as a 3-point shooter. People sleep on him. He's top 25 in the NBA as a wing. He's a wing, and he's top 25 in offensive rebound percentage. He's top 35 in rebound percentage. So he works hard on the glass. He comes off the bench, provides defensive spark, rebounding spark, can shoot well, decent offensive player. I just think he's extremely impactful when he's on the floor. Like guys like Cam Whitmore on the Rockets are offensively, he kind of brings that same level. Defensively, I think people don't think of him in the same light as some of these other really good bench pieces on teams, young core pieces of teams' franchises. But to say the Rockets have him, Whitmore, now Reed Shepherd, all of these amazing bench pieces, uh, they're pretty scary, young and scary.
No, I mean, I think it ties into what I was saying earlier about the Rockets. I definitely feel like they'll be a lot more competitive this year, and I think they could also push for the play-in in the playoffs. I'll be honest though, I've not watched a lot of Tyree Eason. I mean, I probably haven't watched enough of the Rockets in general, but the fact that he was and it's not like he was playing 10 minutes a game. The fact that he's the number one defensive rated player that's played 20 minutes or more, I mean, I don't think that can be understated. I mean, that's impressive. And again, I know I was just saying earlier, like defense is, something that you can acquire. It's maybe not as important. Not, I shouldn't say not as important, but it's not as easy. Offense is not as easy to get, but still, with me saying that, I don't think that defense is not important. I feel like if you had the guy is the number one defensive efficiency or defensive rating on your
Mm-hmm.
team to supplement the Jalen Greens, to supplement the Fred VanVleets, the Alperen Senguns that maybe, are not as good defensively. I mean, I think that's huge. But I guess for me, like, he's probably underrated, like you said, but if, we really want him to talking about him being like, a next level player and being truly underrated, I think we probably want to see him get like 25, 30 minutes here in the next year or so, like really, start to make like a sizable impact and like a noticeable one too on the box score or the sheet after
Yeah.
the game. So I'm curious to see what he does, but everything that you shared suggests that he's got a pretty high upside.
Yeah, I was debating going him or Amin Thompson. They're both like that same kind of level of player on the Rockets, like high energy, like crashes the glass super hard, gives you everything on defense, like a guy true to my heart, Jalen Suggs, that brings as well defensively. But what I was going to say is the Rockets, they have to figure the right way to mix and match their roster because they have all these purely offensive players. They have these purely defensive players, maybe not purely, but like guys that impact defense on a higher level than they impact offense, guys that impact offense at a higher level than they impact defense, like Jalen Green, for example. So finding the right combination, they have such a deep roster, is going to be a really important thing for Udoka to do this season for them to be successful. I don't know which route they'll go. They might even move. Marco thinks they're going to move Jalen Green, and Reed Shepherd's going to end up being the more clean fit as the two guard of the future. So we'll see. I'm high on the Rockets, though. I believe in Udoka as like a coach. So we'll see. Hopefully he gets the best of the bunch this year.
Just keep him away from the
Yeah, I
females.
know. That's why I said a coach.
uh,
I wanted to give one honorable mention.
okay.
You don't have to speak on him much, but I've said defensive rating a lot today. Guess who the number 2 in the NBA in defensive rating is per game Minimum 20 minutes per game. You just won't know who it is. But
Yeah, give it to me.
yeah, sorry. Saying guess is like an impossible question, but it's Dean Wade, my guy
Oh,
on the
wow. Okay.
Cavs. There's a world where if they trade Allen or Mobley, that Dean Wade is just like the cleanest fit as like a four there. He's like super defensive, brings a lot. He's kind of a boring player, like literally does not much on offense, but he's a solid role player, can hit threes and defend really well. So he was an honorable mention on my list because I thought that stuck out to me.
No, I mean, I wouldn't have guessed you really. So
I
I
know, that's
didn't,
why.
you didn't let me guess, and we go for a few minutes. But
Yeah.
no, I mean, not much to add. I guess the only thing I'll say, I feel like with all these defensive metrics, you find a lot of like role players that are at the top, and I feel like with
Mhm.
offense, it's usually the regular guys, the superstars. So I think that's kind of what ties into my take of like sometimes defense is a little overrated, I guess. I mean, again, it's not that it's not important, but yeah, like for example, Dean Wade, I think he's a good player, don't get me wrong, but could he be out of the league in 2 years playing in Europe? It could also happen too.
Cavs fans will come at you for that. Don't worry.
Well, I know we got to jump to our overrated. I'll give you my one honorable mention, super quick, but it was Fred VanVleet.
Mhm.
Again, I actually put him in my overrated tab when I did my knee jerk reaction. But he was 90th percentile for offense and defense. Again, it's all the metrics crunched together. Um, really surprised me. And honestly, it shouldn't have because when he was on the Raptors, he was always a steadying presence on the team. Granted, it was a little bit less so. It was kind of rocky after Lowry left, but he's always been very dependable. He's always been good at facilitating, always good at taking a shot when he needs to. So, yeah, I guess shout out Fred VanVleet. And I think, again, it seems like we're both really bullish on the Rockets. Maybe we got to put a future on them.
No, we do. I already have one. I have a
Oh,
dollar on them to win the championship, but that's not going to happen. Uh, it's fun anyway. And to your point about us betting, um, LeBron James 200 to 1 for MVP next season. Sneaky puts him maybe in the underrated category at this point in his career because age 40 season. He's got his son there. I think he's going to have extra motivation. We've seen him in the Olympics. Kind of feel like he's underrated. Shot over 40% from three last year. He's becoming a different type of scorer and getting more and more efficient at the things he needs to be efficient at offensively. And I just could not believe in him more for his age 40 season, personally.
guy is still in, like he's the top five in player efficiency. He's like I could have easily put him in the underrated category because he's just like in tops of every category at 40 years old.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
insane.
couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah. Also, I'm gonna make this into two podcasts. So I'll do one pod just for the viewers. I'll do one pod that's the underrateds, and then I'll
Underrated.
do one for the overrateds. So we're thinking ahead here. But yeah. Anyway, Stephane, thanks for coming on. For the fans at home, you can follow us on Twitter at another B-ball pod. You can subscribe to us on YouTube. You're watching it right now, I'm sure, or you're listening on Spotify. Go over to our YouTube channel. It's at another basketball channel. It's another basketball channel. And yeah, just like the video. It means a lot. We have 17 subs as of this recording, and we're not going up. So we need to bump that number up to 20, 25, 30. Get the word out there. But we're going to be posting. Thanks so much to everyone for listening. Stephane, thanks for joining me. I really appreciate it. We'll catch up soon.
You got it. Thanks, Justin. Have a good evening.